For most of us, the vast majority of what we eat is processed. And I'm not just talking about ultra-processed foods here. Even foods that might seem fairly close to their natural state, like coffee or chocolate, are the result of some type of processing. And because what we consume is often distinct from the natural ingredients that go into it, could we find cheaper and more sustainable processes to get to the same customer experience in the end? That's the question Adam Maxwell at Voyage Foods has been asking.
Because the fact that the products are processed, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to make them. The reaction mechanisms that generate a chocolate aroma don't necessarily need the exact molecular composition of what's in cacao seeds.
Voyage Foods' product line currently consists of bean-free coffee and cocoa-free chocolate, and peanut and hazelnut-free spreads. To make them cost-effective and more sustainable, they use source materials that are cheaper, more accessible, and often upcycled, but through food science can achieve a taste customers will love.
People buy food because of taste and price primarily. And then, perceived healthfulness and brand. And then pretty far below that is sustainability.
Rethinking food ingredients with Adam Maxwell on today's Future of Agriculture podcast. Well, hello, fellow Ag Nerd. Thanks so much for joining me for another episode of the Future of Agriculture. My name is Tim Hammerich, and if you're interested in where innovative ideas meet practical realities in food production, I think you found the right show. I continue to be interested in pursuing episodes that are more on the food side of the industry. And I think at first glance, some of these stories might make you question whether it really belongs on an agricultural podcast or if it really should be on like a food podcast. But I believe consumer interest and food trends will drive the future of agriculture just as much, if not more, than many of these ag technologies will. So it's really important and honest in a show called Future of Agriculture for us to keep a close watch on these food trends and try to connect the dots about what impacts that could have on our industry and on your business specifically. Guest hosting today's episode is Jennifer Barney. Jennifer has been very generous with her time to bring us several episodes over the years, all focused on food companies. In the past, she's featured companies like Teffola, WonderCow, Alexandre Family Farm, Bibamba, Ugly Fruit Company, Neutral Foods, and Seal the Seasons. She's a successful food entrepreneur, having founded, grown, and sold an almond butter company called Barney Butter. And today she works with consumer packaged goods companies as a consultant and writes the weekly email newsletter, The Business of Food. I'll leave a link in the show notes where you can subscribe to that. Jennifer's going to be interviewing Voyage Foods founder Adam Maxwell. A little bit about Adam's background. He's a native of Boston, and he was drawn to a career in food from a very early age, pursuing his first professional experience as a 14-year-old pastry apprentice at the James Beard award-winning restaurant Clio. He continued to work in fine dining while studying food science at McGill University, but before graduation, he left school to work at Chew Innovation Labs. It was there that he met one of his co-founders for Voyage Foods, Kelsey Tenney, and after his time at Chew, he went on to work for Endless West, the world's first and only molecular wine and spirits company. His belief that everyone deserves to enjoy their favorite foods without compromising on taste or the risk of future access or sacrificing dietary needs led him to eventually launch Voyage Foods in 2021. But before we dive into this interview with Adam here, Jennifer, I'd first like to hear from you. First of all, thanks for coming on to host yet another episode.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to be here, Tim. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Well, why don't you kick us off here by talking about why you thought Voyage Foods and Adam would be a good story to bring to the Future of Agriculture audience?
Well, today we are talking to Adam Maxwell, the CEO of a company called Voyage Foods. And Voyage Foods was established, I think, in 2020 or 2021. They're headquartered in the Bay Area of California. And they are really started as a food tech company, but they are scaling to become a large scale manufacturing company. And what they've done is they've taken traditional commodity food categories such as coffee and chocolate and nut butters, and they're reimagining them to use more widely available, sustainable, upcycled in some cases ingredients to bring price down and bring stability into these inputs and be able to source these materials allows for wider distribution and kind of the health of that demand supply intersection. And so, yeah, Adam was great in giving us the history of kind of where he came from, his background in food science and flavor house, and then, how he got investment and decided to just go for it and get products into market, both retail and food service.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting concept, and it aligns well with a few different things that I've experienced in the last year or so. The first of which is I got to try Atomo coffee, which is made from various byproducts, I think byproducts from several different crops, but it's a cold brew coffee that you just buy in a can. I would drink a lot more of it. I thought it was delicious, except for I'm more of a hot coffee guy myself, but a very interesting product and very much along the same lines of how can we upcycle byproducts into something that consumers are already buying. The other thing that it reminds me of is our recent episode where we talked about kind of gene editing and genetic engineering, and specifically Elo Life. We had Todd Rands on the show. I interviewed him when I was in San Francisco in March for World Agritech, and they're trying to basically reverse engineer the sweetener from monk fruit and that molecule, get that molecule into watermelons and mass produce it. So it's the same type of concept. It's like, all right, let's begin with the end in mind here. We know what consumers want and how can we grow that in a more efficient and sustainable and economical way. So with that, I'm going to drop you into today's conversation here between Jennifer and Adam Maxwell of Voyage Foods.
Yeah, it's definitely like probably luck, not smarts that, we started the company in February 21, and what's happened to the cocoa and coffee market since then, has probably been, from at least commercial standpoint, good for Voyage Foods, still wildly disappointing for the world, including us, from a commercial standpoint. But the real core idea and thesis behind, everything we've done is really basic, right? It's chocolate doesn't grow on trees. What we consume as chocolate doesn't grow on trees. When you taste a raw cacao seed out of a cacao pod, which is what ultimately becomes a chocolate bar or an ice cream coating or a chocolate chip, it tastes more like tropical fruit and lychee with maybe some black tea notes than it does what we know and love as a chocolate bar, right? That is the same with peanuts. Peanuts taste more like hay than they do peanuts. Peanut flavor is actually the flavor of roasted peanut, not endogenous peanut, right? And so that was really kind of the core research aha moment of none of these things exist in the natural world. They're products of process. And because the fact that they're products of process, there's no reason you shouldn't be able to make them from other inputs. The reaction mechanisms that generate a chocolate aroma don't necessarily need the exact molecular composition of what's in cacao seed, so to speak. And so all of our products across the board are really looking at how do we take more cost-effective, more sustainable, more widely available, lower price volatility, upcycled when possible source materials, and through a series of standard food process, transform them into the flavor profiles and macrostructures and textures, et cetera, of some of our favorite foods, right? And so, for example, our cacao-free chocolate, what we're kind of selling industrially today, is made out of grape seeds, which are side streams from the wine manufacturing industry. Only 3% of the billions of kilos of grape seeds that are byproducts of wine every year are even used for anything. Most of it goes to compost, so they're real true side streams and byproducts from those industries. And it's really kind of that oilseed byproducts. Right now we're using sunflower meal, sunflower protein flour, and then sugar, fat, and natural flavors that we make internally. But most of kind of what we make is really, how do we take these wildly efficient inputs and treat them and process them in such ways that we can make the flavors of a chocolate bar or the flavors of, Nutella, et cetera.
And Inform me, because I don't know, where do these crops grow? I mean, I understand grape in the wine industry, and there's grapes all over the world, but you mentioned sunflower. I know sunflower oil is now like very popular and sunflower lecithin is very popular to replace some of the other additives, process aids in other CPG products.
Yeah.
So where are these things grown? Where are they imported or exported from? How are they looking commodity wise in their futures?
Yeah. So the core piece of really some of the thesis of Voyage was like decoupling food from its source material. And so we are using, grape seeds and sunflower protein flour press cake today, but we can use most fruit juice and fruit juice waste across the board. So I grew up in Massachusetts. If we were doing this in Massachusetts, there's a very high degree chance we'd be making it out of cranberries. Massachusetts is the largest cranberry production in the world. If we were in Turkey, we'd be using pomegranate seeds because there's a huge amount of pomegranate juice production there, right? And same thing on the oilseed side of, those press cakes are very much so, byproducts you usually use for animal feed. So depending on who you ask, byproduct or not a byproduct, but everything we use really has global availability. And that's been really important to us of, you're lying to yourself if you're saying we're decoupling food from its source material and then you're tied to this one specific thing that's grown in this one specific place. Like you're lying to yourselves, you're lying to the investment market, and you're lying to your customers. But we have high degrees of flexibility in source material, on the oilseed byproducts, on the, fruit juice and wine byproducts. But, in the wine space, Argentina, Spain, Australia, California, South Africa, all huge wine production. France also, right? We can source globally, and that's always been very important to us of being able to have flexibility there. Because if you want to make a real impact at scale, you need ingredients that are at that scale, right? And you need ingredients that have flexibility. So if there happens to be a really terrible season in one part of the world, you can source from somewhere else. Like obviously there was a contraction in sunflower oil and sunflower products when Russia invaded Ukraine a few years ago. But sunflower seeds and sunflower oil is produced, a huge amount of it is produced in that area of the world, but in the Dakotas, in the US, in China, and in other parts of Europe. And so, we've been very focused from day one of like, you don't see any esoteric ingredients on any of our labels for a reason. The coffee alternative we make is the only ingredient of most of what we're making today is just chickpeas. We can use most legumes, but chickpeas are widely available, very cost effective, and sourceable from most parts of the world, right? India is having a bad season this year, but that doesn't mean the world is having a bad season, right? And so that flexibility has been something very, very important to us day one, because if it wasn't, then we'd be totally full of shit. And that's, not the kind of place you want to be.
Okay. So tell me about like your aha moment and like what, just starting a new company and like leaving what you're doing is a massive step for most people. So I would love to hear about, how you decided to take that step, and then tell us what Voyage Foods is.
Yeah. So I probably didn't realize that it was a big risk or as much work as it really was at the time. It in some ways felt like the most interesting thing and most challenging thing I could do at the time. And that's kind of how I've always pointed my sales, so to speak. But the, aha moment was probably more of a series of aha moments. Really, our initial founding and funding was really February of 2021. But the research started, probably around a year before. And, I think the source case for that was when, the food tech investment space and growth there was just totally exploding, right? There were huge amounts of capital pouring into the space. And I kept looking at what was happening and just confused. And I think part of it was context from being in restaurants and serving people wonderful food. And part of it was my experience at the intersection of some of the largest food companies in the world. And, at the end of the day, people buy food because of taste and price primarily. And then, perceived healthfulness and brand. And then pretty far below that is sustainability, whether it's Boston or Bangalore, London and New York or, Mississippi, people buy food because of taste and price. And it really felt like this kind of novel ingredient space really wasn't solving for the issues that really predicate how everyone globally buys food. And that felt like, totally erroneous and out of touch. And so the initial question was really, can we make food alternatives that, yes, are radically more sustainable, but also absolutely delicious? Clean labels so consumers actually want to consume them, climate resilient, industrially equivalent, cost effective, accessible for everyone forever, which means they're cost effective now and forever, but also allergen free, so everyone can eat them today. Yeah, and scalable. And that was really kind of the research question initially of like, is this possible? And the first things we looked at were really the chocolate space and the coffee space. And that was really because the parts of the world where per capita consumption of these ingredients is growing the fastest is also the areas of the world where population growth is the fastest. And so there's this disproportional supply and demand curve in things like coffee and chocolate globally, while demand is really, steady and or dropping over long time scales. And I think the big thing for me that is probably not necessarily the standard story is I think the sustainability of consumption and sustainability of enjoyment. Making sure that these experiences, like I have a cup of coffee every morning and probably at least one or two the rest of the day. And that is a ritual and beautiful experience. And I think keeping those experiences and that enjoyment alive in a way that is price accessible, not just for people in London and San Francisco, but people everywhere in the world forever was something that was really important. And I think that's the thing that kind of lights me up the most about this is, keeping the experience of consumption alive. And yes, we're 67% lower CO2 in our, ISO-conformant LCAs for our cacao-free chocolate. But I think the sustainability of consumption side is this beautiful ephemeral thing that doesn't really get enough light of day, so to speak.
So, all right, I want to kind of take this linearly a little bit because, you guys are tackling some really, really ambitious things, right? So you're taking large categories, coffee, cocoa, nut butters, and you're reimagining them, creating a whole new process for how to make them, and then also obviously replacing them with alternative commodity inputs that are not the traditional input. Okay, so that right there is a mouthful, and I want to dig into that in a second. But we're back in 2020, and these investors really well because this was the company that you were at. And I'm curious about the pitch and the commitment. So did you have at that point developed prototypes, or was this all concept? So take me back to 2020. You've got these investors' ear. What was it that you were telling them you were going to do?
Yeah, so I think from broad strokes, we had some rough prototypes, costing, manufacturing, how we knew it would be manufactured at scale, cost at scale, et cetera. Rough prototypes that are totally foundationally nothing like what we have today. But the story was really, and in a lot of ways still is, these are commodities that over a long time period, the supply and demand curves will start to shatter. And because of that, there will need to be alternatives, and those alternatives should be more sustainable and more accessible. And that was really the story initially. And from, I think, our first investor deck, we had this little, stepping stone diagram that was saying, we're going to start in retail to validate that we can actually make this stuff and people want it. We'll start in kind of local and small retail. We'll scale in retail. We'll get into large scale food service and small, business to business ingredient sales, then really scale to the more large scale $10 billion plus multinationals, et cetera. And that was, we were putting these materials together right probably in December of 2020. right pre kind of, the initial fundraising. And we definitely didn't do everything right on the way here, but, summer of 2022, we launched in, very small e-com channel just to start getting the factory running and getting good at making product. At the end of that year, we kind of launched in local retail. September of 23, basically less than a year after launching in retail, we launched nationally in Walmart with those two products while simultaneously launching in the school system in the US. And now we're serving, a few 100,000 kids a month in public schools with our kind of nut-free spreads and butters. Not long after that, launched our first kind of ingredient sales partnership with Rudy's Rocky Mountain Bakery that is now national at Whole Foods and in Costco's, et cetera. And kind of simultaneously with that, signed a global exclusive deal with Cargill for sales and distribution of our nut-free fillings and spreads products and cacao-free chocolate ingredients so we could really take those to scale globally. And I think a ton of things we probably didn't do right on the way here, but I think, that story and evolution was something that was always there from day zero.
Okay, so this is super helpful. So you've got flexibility in the input, like you're talking about grape seed, or it could be cranberry, or it could be something else, pomegranate seed. So there's something about your process where you can take these seeds, which must have some commonality in their compounds, but obviously they're different. And so do you have patents? Have your process is really where the magic is happening.
Yeah. We're very much so product, not input focused. And that's how we can really decouple food from its source material in that way. But yeah, we have, I think, 2 accepted and granted patents, probably another 8 or 9 that are on their way to being so. But yeah, I think I filed our first patent for this in 2019, well before the company existed. And yeah, it was more kind of big research questions there. But yeah, there's a bunch of IP in kind of the process. And that's, very much so. You hit it nail on the head of that is very much so where the magic is, because it's, in these very kind of blasé ingredients that don't taste good or like much, turning that into kind of these beloved and storied foods it's all process. Yeah, it's not, we have a fancy flavor house that makes something on top that makes it all taste like chocolate, right? It really is just process.
Yeah, I'm looking at the ingredient list here. So you've got natural flavors as the second to last ingredient, right before salt in the hazelnut-free spread. So, obviously there's something there that's giving, because I'll be honest, I tried these products. I bought them at Walmart expecting to have to spit them out. I'll be totally honest with you. I thought there's no way something made from chickpeas and sunflower is actually going to taste like Peter Pan or, Nutella. And I was very surprised. And I mean, nut butter is spreads, is my category. I know it very well. And I got to tell you, you guys you definitely nailed the hazelnut. I would say if I had a blind taste test and I was tasting your peanut free spread and somebody told me, okay, now you're going to have peanut butter and you put this in my mouth, I would tell you that wasn't peanut butter.
Yeah.
But I would also tell you it was really good. And I hate to say it, I do not like sun butter. I know that that's the number one option for parents and folks who are peanut free or nut free, that you can't have any tree nut or peanut. Sun butter is like pretty much your only option. And I've always been very put off by its aftertaste. This did not have that. So this is not a plug. I'm just being honest. I have to be honest. But I want to get back. So we're talking about process and we're talking about taking these commodities that are more available and less costly and ostensibly have like a better, brighter future in agriculture than their current traditional counterparts. Yeah. So now process-wise, today, is your process cost effective? I'm thinking about energy. I'm thinking about how mechanized and automated are you? Like, tell me about your, I guess, carbon footprint when it comes to, okay, now you bringing all of these commodities in, you've got this really great, like, build of materials, if you will. You've got your process. And then what's going on in the plant?
Yeah, so it's, in a lot of ways, in functionally all ways, it's similar to the traditional chocolate production or coffee production. In a lot of ways, it's actually much simpler. And so if you look at like a carbon footprint analysis of a chocolate bar, let's say a kilo block of chocolate, a very small percentage of that is from the process. Practically all of it is from growing and making the cacao, and a lot of that is the deforestation associated with it. And so we have kind of exact parity in terms of carbon footprint on process. And if you look at our factories, most of them look very similar to the large chocolate factories in the world or coffee factories in the world. And so from a process standpoint, functionally all that is the exact same. Same level of automation, very similar suppliers, et cetera, et cetera. There's a few kind of mystery pieces in between, but there's nothing that's kind of in the biotech space that's wildly expensive, super energy intensive, long hold times for weeks for culturing cells or doing fermentation, anything like that. It's all much more kind of standard food process technology that nets out kind of parity in terms of the conversion, carbon footprint, time intensivity, cost of capital in that way.
So I read that your coffee, and again, you're replacing commodity coffee. That your goal is not to make like the fair trade, high end intelligentsia coffee, correct? So I've read anywhere from in terms of the cost is 60% of the cost, 40% of the cost. I'm curious, how much cost are you saving?
Depends what date we're talking about, right? Like when pegging to very volatile commodities, it's like, depending on the date, it's different, right? Right now it's probably 60% cheaper than traditional coffee, but because things like coffee and cocoa are such volatile markets, it's, if we said we are always 50% cheaper, then we would have to also be wildly volatile in terms of our pricing. And one of the, I think, benefits, one of the things we've really tried to work towards that I think is important to industry is price and cost stability, right? With that comes lower working capital needs for our customers. You're not contracting out as far. You don't have to price in as much risk into your, product formulations and your P&L. And so, we're trying to offer a very, stable price depending on kind of what scale people are purchasing at. But I think right now it's probably right around 60% lower cost than kind of traditional roast and ground coffee.
And I would imagine a lot of that comes down to economics. So, if you can both make it. So I'm curious, are you thinking about pricing in the ingredient market as like price parity to coffee? Or are you thinking about, hey, we're going to come in because our margins are so wonderful that we just want to make X because that's what we need and that hits our shareholder targets. And we're just going to come and undercut the market because we know we can. It's a question.
Yeah, I think it's less the we know we can, but more of the accessibility for everyone forever is something that I think is a beautiful kind of thematic want. And, where things like coffee are the largest growth areas in terms of per capita consumption are really the emerging markets that are much more price sensitive. And so being able to help manufacturers have lower incoming price points or be able to serve more people or offer more cost effective things at retail, I think is important for us. And for that reason, we're very much so not looking at pegging our pricing to coffee, but really being a cost-friendly alternative to manufacturers globally. Because at the end of the day, things like coffee and chocolate, I think if you asked most people in most parts of the world, handed them a chocolate chip cookie and be like, how was that chocolate chip made? They wouldn't be like, well, it grew in a cocoa pod on a tree, probably in West Africa, and then was fermented and then shipped to this part and turned into a cocoa liquor here and then turned into a chocolate bar, right? These foods are already so decoupled from colloquial understanding from their source material, that at the end of the day, humans just crave the experience of coffee. And we're so decoupled from the idea of how it's made, how it's manufactured, et cetera, that, at the end of the day, people want the experience of consumption. And if we can offer that at a lower cost, we should make sure that that is passed on to the consumer as much as is possible.
Yeah, totally get it. It's like if an alien landed here from outer space and you had to explain to them, how do you make all of these products that are daily rituals for people, right? It would be like, wait a minute, you do what? When you have all these other readily available sources, and you have the technology to do it differently, right? So it's almost that mindset of like complete ignorance coming into it and explaining it to somebody who has complete ignorance.
Yeah.
It makes so much sense. Well, I really commend you for what you're doing. I love what you're doing. I think this is an approach to solving a problem in agriculture that this is what I really dig into is how do we meet consumer demand in a way that shapes the way that we treat the land, the way that gives back to, the agriculture community in a way that's sustainable for the future of agriculture. So I really appreciate your time. I would love to just ask you a couple closing questions that have to do with, as much as you're willing to share, like, tell me about the next 6 months, 12 months, 18 months for Voyage Foods.
Yeah, I think a lot of it is really, transitioning from this food technology startup to more of a, fully functioning food manufacturing company, right, at a global scale, right? We're going from, probably a smaller, more manual facility to a automated 300,000 square foot factory. And when people talk about food technology companies, I've always thought it's silly to, talk to the Cargills, Nestle's, and Marses of the world. Oh, we're a food technology company. Like, who is more advanced in that space than the Marses and Cargills and Nestle's of the world, right? But, they have some of the most deep applications knowledge of how these products are used in industry. They sell these ingredients at, many billions of dollars a year. And, we want to make sure that we can be the best partner possible to them to deliver these solutions to their customers. And so I think it's really this evolution from this kind of more earlier stage company to a large scale manufacturing company, which is a big shift, right? Which I'm sure you went through on your journey also, of going from we're doing to like, we're really here and we're serving some, largest food companies in the world, very important solutions that help solve problems that they've been working on solving for a long time. And I think that's probably in a broad strokes, very much so the kind of big thing we're trying to solve internally is really pulling up our bootstraps and growing up into a more kind of mature company. Yeah.
All right, well, that is going to do it for today's episode. Big thank you, of course, to Adam Maxwell of Voyage Foods for being on the show, and to Jennifer Barney for bringing this story to the podcast. If you'd like to learn more about what Adam's doing, I'll leave a link in the show notes for their website, as well as Jennifer's Business of Food newsletter, where you can go check that out. I'd love your feedback on these food episodes or interesting trends on the food side of the industry that you think might impact where agriculture needs to head. If you have any recommendations or ideas, I'm never really looking for guests. I'm really looking for stories, if that makes any sense. But you can send those to me at tim@aggrad.com or via LinkedIn or Twitter. DM is okay as well. Thanks so much for listening. I really do not take it lightly. I'll be back next week with another story of ag innovation.